In this video, I'm going to share with you my Google slide presentation, which is an ongoing collection of student samples, examples of the real teachers' tasks that they have accommodated or modified, and also my specific tips and suggestions. You will have full access to this document. You will get a copy of it, but because, like I said, it's an ongoing document, you will need to check in frequently as I add new components to it. If you haven't checked it out yet, I do recommend watching part 1 of the ELL tips for working with content area teachers, where I specifically talk about motivating your colleagues. I do make a couple of references to it in this video, and I think it will help you reinforce the ideas that I'm sharing here. And here is my presentation that I titled ELL Newcomers Strategies for Content Area Teachers. I take it with me and share with content area teachers with whom I meet to discuss strategies in their classroom, specifically for newcomers, but a lot of strategies are applicable for higher level ELL students. In this presentation, I share with them that they will get big ideas and recommendations and learn several important concepts in the area of ELL newcomer support in content classes. They will also get to see specific activities and strategies, as well as samples of student work. My big message number 1 is that content teacher's job is twofold: teaching the content and the English language related to it. We all know that this is probably one of the scariest messages a content area teacher wants to hear. But throughout this presentation and throughout my collaboration with them, I try to convince them that this is not as hard as it looks, and that also most likely they are already doing it without even knowing it. The other part of this big message is that because beginner's English is still so limited, teachers should feel flexible and free to modify their content to help ELL students access it. The same goes for assessment. Now, I have teacher friends who teach ELL who do not agree with this message and are not necessarily expressing to their teachers to be flexible. They are rather focusing on training teachers to look at their curriculum and to try to create activities that would allow for mastery of those skills in their ELL students. And on the other hand, I have colleagues who teach ELL who are even more flexible and recommend more creativity, more of a, I call, humane approach, and basically say everything goes. And I think I find myself somewhere in the middle. I do encourage the content area teachers to look at their curriculum and to focus on the key components of it, key concepts and vocabulary, but to still take into consideration the stress level that our ELL beginners are having to move to another classroom, another school, another country, and many other layers that being an ELL student encompasses. Here I'm sharing an interesting fact that I found online in this blog, Newcomers and Beginning English Learners, Where Do I Start? You have all of this information here. I consider this not just an interesting fact, but a very helpful tip. And by the way, if you click here, you will be sent to the complete document that I created for content area teachers, and this quote is part of that document. Students with an English proficiency level of 1 or 2 understand on average about 20% of any lesson when supports are used. So work smarter, not harder. What's the most important 20% of your content for the day? This is where you add visuals, focus on visual vocabulary, use hands-on experiences, video notes, pages, organizers, etc. to support students in understanding your message. This is also where you give yourself and students a break and agree that it's not low expectations if they don't get everything. It's reality. I personally love this quote. I feel like it saved me from a lot of trouble, and I like sharing it with teachers, and it definitely puts them at ease with a lot of their questions about ELL newcomer work in their classes. So here's an example of focusing on 20%. In the beginning of the school year, an English 3 and 2 teacher and I met to talk about newcomer work in their class, and the unit they were teaching was cultural identity, where they were reading and analyzing a poem. So the teacher here decided to focus on the concept of identity, and she presented her newcomer with a graphic organizer. One of them said USA in the middle, and the other one Guatemala, which is the country that newcomer is from. And in the circles around it, they would have to write words that represent them in each of the settings. I love this graphic organizer because such things help clarify the concepts by making personal connections, and also allow students to use English at their level and to learn new vocabulary related to the content. I also suggested to the teacher this ELL Teacher tip. Use it to make a bridge to the poem. Have the student fill in the same about the character. We all know how powerful the connections drawn from the content to the student's personal experiences could be. Here's my other tip to that teacher. Provide models or sample work from other students. If you are given a graphic organizer to the entire class and you know it might be above the student's level of English, or they might not have ever worked with a graphic organizer of that sort, make sure to give them completed work by another student or your own. I will never agree with those educators who say that this is called cheating and that we're just allowing students to copy things. We need to remember that learning a language is a process, and a big part of that is constant exposure to the model of spoken and written language. My big message number 2, remember, all students know something and all students have something to add to the conversation. Think of what they can do rather what they can't. Think of what kind of activities you would like to participate in if you were a newcomer in a foreign country. We all often forget that when a newcomer comes in, even with a very low English language proficiency, they are cognitively ready for a lot of our tasks, and they are exciting people. And so, of course, they have something to add to the conversation happening in the classroom. Here is another kind of graphic organizer focusing on the same topic, which is identity. This is a starburst identity chart. I found it online and I loved it, and you do have a link to it. So the student would put their name in the middle, and on the arrows pointing outward, they would write words or phrases that describe what they consider to be key aspects of their personality. At the ends of the arrows pointing inward, they would write labels that others might use to describe them. This was an eye-opening and a very interesting activity for our newcomer, because on one of these he wrote Guatemala, because that's where he is from, and on the other he wrote Mexican. And I asked him to tell me what's happening here, and he said that while he's from Guatemala, most people, when approach him, think that he's from Mexico. Needless to say, this was an interesting experience, and this is something he will not forget, and he will remember this class, and he will remember the work in this class. Big message number 3, native language is totally acceptable and encouraged in content classes. Again, here is part of the document that I created for content area teachers, where I specifically talk about native language support. So number 1, if a student is literate in their first language, you can provide some instruction in that language. Examples of materials that could be presented in language 1 are books, articles, textbooks, etc. Also, a student should be offered translated directions and explanations of tasks to help build understanding and background. Bilingual peer tutor, if available, is a great resource to help clarify tasks in language 1 too. So here I'm showing teachers how they can approach translating documents and directions. So this is a good example also because this document has directions that are typed up by the teacher, but it also has a screenshot. And this is a good example of how this limits our ability to translate. So if you go into Google Docs, for example, where this document is created, you would go to Tools, Translate Document, choose a language. I'm just going to go with Albanian right now and translate. And this way teachers can see that all of their directions that they typed up themselves are translated. However, the screenshot is not. So they just have to keep that in mind. Of course, this is not the end of the world, but important to take into consideration. Now, even with directions and terms being translated, you can still see this is a lot for newcomer. And it is still very important to remember that teachers should allow for the student to focus on just a part of it. What would be the most important terms and questions and directions for the student to focus on? Moving on. Examples of using Language 1 support. Example 1. Allow listening to the material in Language 1 or in English with subtitles. Ask to write a summary of what student has learned or to answer literal and inferential questions. For my visual directions on how to change subtitles in YouTube, see next slide. On the next slide, I am showing step by step with visuals how a student can do this on their own. And so this is an example of a summary of To Kill a Mockingbird in English. And if you can't find this in the student's native language, they would just have to change the language here. And they would listen to this text while seeing the text in their native language. Again, this helps them build background and listen for some details, and then especially if you have them write a summary of what they have learned in their native language, that is even taking it a step further for them. So here is this slide with step-by-step directions for how to change subtitles into their language. We're moving on to example number 2 of Language 1 support. Pre-teach key concepts and vocabulary in Language 1. Ideally, you should accompany that by teaching the same material using simpler English language. Example number 3. Create or find online summaries of novels and other pieces of literature and offer to read in both languages. After reading, an ELL student can answer text-related questions first in Language 1 and then in English. Here we have a link to an example of a summary online. This is like one of the first things that I found. You do want to review that prior to offering it to the student to make sure that it is meeting your needs, even has an audio to this transcript. I would recommend copying this and pasting into a Word document because then you can also translate it easily using Microsoft Translator. Moving on, after the student previews the assignment or studies the content in their language, they can be assigned the same task or content in English, but with simplified language and, if needed, with modified tasks. I kind of have already explained that in the previous slide, but I do want to get this message across. This way, we are teaching content and English related to that content at the student's language proficiency level. And this is where we refer the teacher back to that scary message of their task being twofold. Examples of modified tasks after clarifying the assignment in Language 1. Students can write captions to illustrations, they can create slide decks with key concepts and visuals, they can fill in graphic organizers. An easy, a little less effective idea is to let students copy prepared notes and responses. And remember, this is after they had already previewed and got the gist and maybe wrote the summary and translated some of it in English prior to being presented with the authentic piece of work that everybody else is working on. You can also highlight specific vocabulary and ideas in the notes for the student to translate in their language or to answer questions about. So here's what I'm talking about. So the students in one of the classes were reading an article on the cultural identity, and they were instructed to take notes as they were reading it and then also to write key ideas and details. Obviously, this is still very difficult for our newcomers and beginners. Even after they previewed it in their language, they listened maybe to an audio, wrote a summary, because this is still a lot of unknown vocabulary. So why not offer them ready-made notes prepared by other students? And I actually found this online, so somebody had already posted this online, and to highlight the vocabulary or the ideas you want them to focus on. Then they can independently translate it in their language or to create a slide deck or fill in a graphic organizer. Other examples of accommodations and modified tasks after clarifying the assignment in Language 1. They can now work in small groups or with a partner. The teacher can also provide completed assignments, sort of what I have just shown you with that article and highlighted vocabulary and ideas, with some or all answers, and have ELL retype the responses and or translate them. Assessment. In the beginning could be all done in Language 1 or in combination of Language 1 and in English. English. One of my favorite strategies is to allow my newcomers to show what they have learned via Language 1 first, and then to have them memorize a short summary of the material in English, to answer comprehension questions using sentence starters in English, and or to take a picture vocabulary quiz. Again, this way I'm assessing the content and the English language related to that content at their level. I'm gonna leave this up to you to read, but this is another resource I found online. I really like these ideas for alternate assessment of ELL writing, but I do want to draw your and your teacher's attention to this message. Please say yes to Flipgrid. If your content era teachers have not discovered this powerful tool, I strongly encourage for them to check it out. This is a slide that actually was put together by one of my colleagues for one of the presentations we worked on for the staff. This gives you ideas of what you can do there, what you can find there, but I was so impressed with English 2 and English 3 teachers just this past exam time, because they created a special assignment for our newcomer by giving him an article in English and Spanish, and had him first summarize it in both Spanish and English, and then he had to read the English summary, recording himself on Flipgrid, and to answer some questions that they have created for him to answer. My big message number 4 is that using Language 1 as a way to teach and assess newcomers is a very effective strategy, but should not be used exclusively. When applied, it has to be combined with instruction in English 2. Using Language 1 is a powerful way to help your students gain better understanding of the theme, unit, book, and to have your expectations clarified, but students need to continuously have access to the key vocabulary and concepts in English as well. When planning projects, assignments, and assessments in English, a good reference to use is the can-do descriptors document. It will give you an idea of what tasks a student is able to perform in English and what tasks we can push them towards too. Now, this is a little bridge to the can-do descriptors, and right here, I do not have my completed project on the can-do. I'm still working on it. I do think that when we just show this and read to the teachers, we might create some confusion, and it's not super helpful. I know some of my colleagues I saw on Facebook, I see a lot of wonderful explanations of can-dos, and I'm still going to review those and combine with my ideas onto how to make the best use out of this. So please stay tuned for that. And also, if I haven't made it clear, I think my message here is for the teachers to keep calm and carry on. And for some reason, this was one of the first visuals that popped up, and I think it's kind of symbolic that sometimes in order for us to stay calm and to carry on, we have to, at least in the beginning, turn upside down a little bit and to look at things from a different angle, but at the end, it's all fun and relaxing and possible to accomplish. Another message, allow yourself to take baby steps. As usual, thank you for watching, and remember that you can find all of my materials as well as links to my video tutorials and interactive vocabulary lessons for ELL students on my Facebook page, Alyona's ELL Class Live.